Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to playtechNZ. My name is Kevin, and today we're going to be checking out the Nvidia Geforce GTX980Ti, and this guy is an absolute beast, so you're really going to want to watch this video. Let's start out with the looks. This is obviously a reference model from ASUS, and looks wise it just looks the same as every other Nvidia reference card out there, going all the way back to the GTX Titan. So yeah, not really too much to say here. I don't really dislike the look of it. I just wish they would spice it up. You know, I'm still fine with how this looks. I don't think it looks bad, but I just wish they could spice it up, maybe refresh it slightly or do something a little bit different for these newer reference cards. So yeah, I just wish there was a little bit more. However, looks don't count for very much, and let's get on with the GPU. So this guy is more closely related to the Titan X than the GTX 980. And the easiest way to explain what the 980 Ti is basically a slightly nerfed Titan X. So the GPU in this guy is the 28 nanometer GM200 Maxwell GPU, similar to the one found in the Titan X, very different to the GM204 GPU that you find in the GTX 980. However, there's a change in the CUDA cores. So the 980 Ti is featuring 2,816 CUDA cores compared to the 3,072 CUDA cores that you get in the Titan X. So a little bit of a difference there. There's also a bit of a difference in the memory. So the 980 Ti features 6 GB of GDDR5 memory at 7,010 MHz on a 384-bit memory bus. The same as the Titan X in every way, except the Titan X has twice the amount of memory. It has 12 GB of memory. Now, as far as GPU speeds go, it's coming with a 1000 MHz or 1 GHz base clock and a boost clock speed of 1075 MHz. This will change with GPU Boost 2.0, which will automatically overclock the graphics card if temperatures allow. So this one I was testing in particular auto overclocked all the way up to 1202 MHz, so a decent jump up there. Now TDP wise, this features the same TDP as the Titan X of 250 watts. That's in quite a stark contrast to the GTX 980, which features a TDP of 165 watts, so quite the jump up there. Minimum system power requirement for this guy from Nvidia is 600 watts. We will be talking about power a little later, so that's kind of just take that with a grain of salt. Now, size-wise, it's coming in at about the normal for a Nvidia reference card, since it's running the exact same cooler. So it's coming in at 282 millimeters long, so it is a decently long card. 110 millimeters wide, so it's quite skinny, and 43 millimeters tall. So overall, this should fit in the vast majority of cases out there. Pretty much every mid-tower should be able to take this guy. You might need to take out a hard drive cage if your mid-tower is a bit smaller. However, it should still fit in the vast majority of cases out there, no worries at all. Power connection wise, it just takes a single 8-pin and a single 6-pin, pretty standard there. SLI wise, you're able to go up to 4-way SLI with this guy, the same as the Titan X. Now, as far as I/O goes, it's also the standard kind of reference Nvidia I/O of these days. So you get triple DisplayPort 1.4, get a single HDMI 2.0, which means 4K at 60 Hz, and with those DisplayPorts, you'll be able to do up to triple G-Sync and a single DVI-I connection. Now there's all the new Maxwell features as well, which I'm not going to get into too much in this video because it'll make it all too long, and we have covered it before, but you can just look up that or watch previous videos if you want to be filled in of all the new Maxwell features, but the vast majority of you probably already know what most of those are by this point. Without further ado, let's get into the benchmarks to see how this 980 Ti does. Now, I wanted to put it up against the ones that are either side of it in terms of NVIDIA's graphics card lineup right now. So on the lower side is the MSI Gaming 4G GTX 980, and on the upper side is the reference Titan X, and the 980 Ti is obviously smack bang in between them right now. I also wanted to do 980 Ti's and SLI to see what the scaling was like, so I threw those benchmarks in as well. Now, this card is pretty overkill for 1080p gaming. Now, those of you who are gaming at 1080p on a 60Hz monitor, this will definitely be pretty overkill, since at 1080p everything's going to be you know, very in the triple digits in the frames department. However, if you're running a high refresh rate monitor, say like a 144 Hz monitor, then this may still be a consideration if you want to, you know, have your refresh rate really high all the time. So it still can be considered by some of the people out there, but for the sake of these benchmarks, we did them all at 1440p as a minimum. So let's start out with Tomb Raider. So this is everything maxed out at 1440p. You see the 980 Ti does a really solid job. They absolutely blows the 980 out of the water, and very close there to the Titan X, only 4 frames in it. Now at 4K, unfortunately I didn't do the Titan X testing at 4K, but you can also see between the other cards, it does a really solid job there, beating out the 980 again, although it does bring them a bit closer. Now, BioShock Infinite, this is on user setting 2. At 1440p, they all do a really good job, but you see the 980 Ti once again pulls very far ahead from the 980. You see the scaling to the SLI is still pretty decent, kind of average, what you would expect, and it is very close there to the Titan X. And at 4K, it does a really solid job again, nearly at 60 frames per second average on the single 980 Ti, so a really solid job there. Now the last game I want to do is high requirement game Shadow of Mordor. So at 1440p, they all keep over 60 frames. However, the 980 Ti still pulls quite far ahead of the 980 and is very close to the Titan X, you know, only 2 frames away. And then when we jump up to 4K, you still see that this game is an absolute beast for games to run. Even the 980 Ti by itself was struggling at 47 average frames per second. So yeah, a lot we can take from this, but mainly is that this pulls far, far ahead of the 980, and it's very, very close. You know, considering the highest clock speed my Titan X was going up to was 1177 megahertz, so slightly less than this 980 Ti. Yet it still beats it, but only by about 2 to 4 frames per second, so it is very, very close to the Titan X. And considering that this is coming in at a significantly lower price, it just shows how much of a step up the 980 Ti is over the 980. Let's move on now to heat. So obviously this is running the reference cooler, so thermal performance isn't going to be the greatest, and when non-reference models of the 980 Ti all start coming out, then it will do a much better job in the heat department anyways. So for this, we did the Unigine Valley benchmark on the Extreme HD preset, and you see the 980 Ti went up to 84 degrees Celsius at 48% fan speed, the exact same as a Titan X, since it's pretty much the same chip, and they're on the same cooler. So no real surprises there. The non-reference 980 does significantly better, and noise-wise, it was doing, the 980 Ti was doing 61 decibels during the benchmark, whereas the non-reference 980 was 59 decibels during the benchmark. So not really too surprising there. Obviously, when, as I said, the non-reference models come out, then temperatures will be a bit better, but there was no thermal throttling that I saw anyways, and the thermal limit on this guy is 91 degrees Celsius, so that's quite good too. Now let's move on to the power consumption. So my specifications for my rig are up on the screen right now, so you can see what the test platform for all these benchmarks was anyways. And now we'll get into the actual power it was drawing. So I gave 2 different power. So this is the highest power consumption, even if it just went up there for a short period of time. This was the highest power consumption I saw. And I did 2 different ones. I did the benchmark, so the highest power consumption I saw after running through all the benchmarks. That's mainly just the graphics power. And then in IDA 64 with everything being stressed out, you know, the CPU, the memory, everything, the graphics cards, to show a real kind of like worst case scenario what it was pulling from the rig. And as you can see, the 980 Ti does a really good job. I mean, it is a bit of a jump up from the 980, but yeah, it's nothing too surprising. Even with 2 in the rig at IDA 64, it was only going up to 610 watts, which means depending on what else you have in your rig, I mean, my 4770K is overclocked to 4.4 gigahertz as well. You should be able to run 2 of these guys in your rig With a 750 watt power supply, very easily, even if you had more stuff in your rig, maybe more fans or different other things, different CPU. So that's quite cool that the power consumption, although the TDP might seem quite high, is actually still relatively low when you compare it to some other cards which have come out previously, which I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, I thought it was pretty good in terms of power consumption. Which finally brings us to the conclusion now. So the 980 Ti is still coming in at quite a bit of a higher price than the GTX 980, but it is significantly cheaper than the Titan X, which means to me personally, it comes in for a upper, enthusiast level card at the perfect price to performance, because it is more expensive than the 980, but you're getting a significant jump up, about 20 frames per second jump up with the 980 Ti over the 980. And it's significantly cheaper than the Titan X, which is only getting about 2 to 4 frames better than the 980 Ti. So I think the 980 Ti is a very, very solid price to performance Nvidia card, just like the GTX 970 still is a very solid card in that area too. And I think it's much more solid in terms of what you pay for it to what you get performance-wise than the GTX 980, but that is just my personal opinion. So I really, really like this guy, and I would really recommend it to anyone out there looking just for an absolute beast of a graphics card. And it's just going to smash everything, especially at 1440p and especially at 1080p. And even a single one of these will still get you by at 4K gaming, but you might have to bump down quite a few of the settings to maybe, like, depending on what game it is, you might need to bring them down to, say, a medium if it's a very high requirement game, or you still might be able to get away with high on some maybe older games, or ultra on some older games. So it still does a really good job at 4K too. Now I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to playtechNZ and like the video, and as always, I'll see you guys next time.